You ready to talk Memento?
What's that? Where are we? There's going to be a
So
lot of it. I hope you know.
that's totally fine. Um, Let me ask you this, because you've seen the Christopher Nolan Batman films.
Yep.
Have you seen other Christopher Nolan movies?
Um, Name some other than Interstellar, please.
The Prestige.
Yes, have seen that. Love it. I read the book too.
Okay. His first film, I believe, it was his first film, Following.
Haven't seen that.
Okay. Um,
Give me one more, and then I'll answer your question.
Damn it. Now I'm having trouble. I should like just pull it up on my phone or like just have that in. I feel like there's one more that I'm missing. I'm gonna kick myself. But
I'm gonna Google it right now.
okay, because I mean between the Prestige, the Batman stuff, this movie and Interstellar, I mean that pretty much takes up the last
Oh,
20
Inception,
years. Inception, yes.
and Dunkirk, and Insomnia. Okay, so I have seen actually a fair few uh, Christopher Nolan films, including all three Batmans, um, Inception, and now Memento. Did he also do Looper? Oh wait, did he do Batman
No,
versus Superman: Dawn of Justice?
no, he did not. And
Oh,
this
it says he.
conversation is over. No,
Well, it's. I searched Christopher Nolan movies and he's just listed, so I'm very confused.
he might
Um,
be like an executive producer or
yeah,
something
yeah,
like that because that was around the time he was handing off the
Batman,
torch.
yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I can't believe I forgot about. Well, I'm one of the only people on the planet who doesn't care for Inception, um, and I totally forgot about the whole Dunkirk thing, even though I love that movie.
I'm gonna invade your dreams and make you like Inception. No, I'm just kidding.
You
Um,
already invaded my dreams, Cole.
well, that good. Mission accomplished. Um, I'm not one of those people who's just fawning over Inception like it's the greatest piece of cinema ever made. I think that a lot of people kind of stand for that movie in a way that is unnecessary, in my opinion. Um, Good. I love the concept. I think it's a well executed thing. He has this way, obviously, as showcased by Memento, of playing with story structure. He also has a really cool way of like working with actors, I think, because in all the movies I've seen, the acting is really good. And that could just be a product of like he's working with talented people, right? But I don't know too much about how movies are made. I believe that a director has a ton of influence over just like how the film looks, feels, sounds, acts, everything, including how the actors are portraying their characters, right? Um, and to me, Memento is a great example of that. And I have always, in the back of my head, liked Christopher Nolan as much as somebody who's only seen four of his movies can. Um, and as a millennial, like Christian Bale Batman is my Batman. Like that's when you say who do you think of as Batman, that's who I think of, right? As I'm sure other people think George Clooney or Val Kilmer or Michael Keaton even. Fuck Adam West though. That's like that's leotard Batman. Um, so yeah, I think Memento is one of those movies that kind of cements him as like this is a director you whose movies I would want to always see. And I still haven't done Interstellar, but I'm sure it's similar. I've heard it's kind of that mind-bending type of movie as well, but in a much different setting and with space, which I also love. Everybody loves space, right? Um, I'm just gonna insert Space Odyssey comparison here, and but yeah, this is one of those movies that just like kind of cements the director in my head is like, yeah, this guy knows how to tell a story in a unique and interesting way. And Memento for me, the first thing I wanted to say, the one thing I wrote down in my notes to cover was it kind of has this Fight Clubby vibe about it,
Hmm.
and I wanted to bring this up with you specifically because I love Fight Club, and I know many others who do. And I think that Memento is right up in the upper echelon of like mindfuck movies with Fight Club. But there's something, and I can't put my finger on it, that just kind of like holds it back a little bit. And I think maybe you can help me like, elucidate some of my thoughts here. For me, it's that Memento offers up all these details and kind of leaves you to make the conclusion. And I'm fine with that. I've come to terms with ambiguity over the years that we've done this podcast. But I think that the ending of Memento, which we're jumping straight to because it's kind of the beginning of Memento,
Yes.
is when the cop whose name Teddy is telling him like, we found the guy a year ago, and it kind of opens up this cask of like unreliable narrator thoughts and things, and it kind of just unlocks the mystery for you a little bit, and says, here, do what you will with this.
Yeah.
Whereas if you take a movie like Fight Club, it kind of answers all the questions you have. And maybe it's that lack of ambiguity in Fight Club that I liked a little more, that just kind of like holds Memento back for me. But it doesn't mean I liked it any less. It's just like that's the key difference that I found, and the little disconnect that I'm kind of dealing with.
Well, I think part of it is that, and let me just say that I loved Memento 20 years ago, and I can't believe we're talking about a movie, that I saw when I was 22 that is now 20 years old. I mean, it feels like it was yesterday. Mm-hmm. And my wife reminded me, because I just watched it this morning for the first time in probably 15 years. She reminded me of how we went to see this with a group of friends at a theater 2 decades ago. And when we came out, I was like on cloud 9, just in love with this movie. And everybody else in the group hated it. I think a lot of it was the fact that we're dealing with underworld characters and people who are so compromised and skeevy in their own, unique ways. There's no... The brightest example of a good guy in this film probably is the motel owner.
Yep, I was going to say the exact same thing. And even he's selling him 2 rooms.
Right, yeah. And I think for a lot of people, and particularly the group that I was with, they're not able to get past this idea of like, why would I want to spend 2 hours watching these reprehensible people? It's, not as I think it was Gene Siskel said, it's not what the story is about, it's how it's about it. And I was just, this is my first brush with Christopher Nolan, as it was with a lot of people, because I didn't see his first film Following until probably 10 years later. Another movie I highly recommend. But as far as that missing piece that you're talking about, I had that same feeling because when Memento first came out, I watched it like 2 or 3 times, I think, in the theater. And then I watched it when I bought it on home video. And then I didn't see it again until this morning. And I'd lost a lot of that stuff. I'd, no pun intended, forgotten a great deal of the movie and the kind of the twists and turns.
I'm calling you out. I think that pun was intended.
You'll never know. There's some of that ambiguity you like. But I think the thing is, Memento is a movie that needs to be watched more than once in order to unpack everything, because there's so much of it's not exactly an information dump. It's a narrative device dump in the last like 5 minutes of this movie. They're like, whoa, wait a second, huh? We're given little clues throughout, but then at the end of it, you're like, well, okay, so it's a question that I posed to you over Messenger when we were talking about this movie this morning. Who the fuck is Dodd?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a device. He's a character, and he does figure into the story, but it's not like at the end of other movies where they kind of pull the like even Fight Club, where you can very easily go back and say, oh, this was what was going on all along. Dodd is one of those characters that you really have to almost sit and draw your own map and take your own Polaroids and label them like, oh, that's how he kind of figures into this, and that's why he's important. And, I feel like the structure of the movie makes him more important than he is to the actual story. And I think that more than one viewing will help put that into clearer focus.
Right. And I like that this movie begs for more viewings, because there's so many movies that we watch for this that I'm like, okay, glad I saw it, pass, And it's not even that they're bad or that I didn't like them. It's just like, is something worth repeat viewings? And this movie begs to be watched like 1,000,000 times. And I can't remember the last time I watched a movie and I was so figuratively on the edge of my seat, because it's so cool. Here, I'll back up just a second. It's really commendable for any storyteller to try to mess with a formula, right? It's commendable to do that. It's incredibly rare that it succeeds. A lot of experimental films or storytelling methods just like don't pan out that well. But when it succeeds, like, it's just pure fire. And that's what this movie feels like, because I was watching, Aaron was making dinner for like the first 20 minutes. So I paused it and explained a little bit. And I was like, so we're getting like little morsels, ahead of what we just saw in the color segments. And when I kind of like formed that thought of morsels in my head, I was like, I want to keep eating the next one. Like it's like pieces of popcorn. I'm like shoveling them into my mouth. I can't wait until what happens. And it's just like knowing that once I finish one morsel, I'm gonna get, you know, the satisfying black and white portion. It's just I don't know, it just like oozes and begs for you to be watching more and more and more. And I don't remember like longing to see what happens next in a movie in such a very long time. And again, not a knock on any other movie. It's just like this one grabs you right from the start by proposing this mystery and having you figure it out with the character. I ended up watching an interview with Christopher Nolan afterwards where he's like, this is the way I did it, was just by telling the story backwards so that you only know exactly what Leonard knows. And I'm like, that it's just genius. It's something that seems so simple, but to execute is so difficult. And he does it just almost to sheer perfection. And ending aside and ambiguity aside, like whatever you think, there's just so much fun to be had watching this to unravel the mystery alongside the main character. There was a moment I looked at Aaron and I was like, I mean, I don't want to think that this guess is too obvious, but like maybe he is Sammy Jenkins, or maybe some of him is. And she was like, And then you flash to the scene where he's in the mental institution, and for like a split second, it transfers from Sammy to Leonard, and Aaron taps me and she gives me like that nice nod, like, oh yeah. And I was like, I turned to her, I'm like, oh yeah. And we're just so proud of ourselves for figuring out even the smallest piece. But even beyond Leonard and the mystery, the characters in this movie are just phenomenal. Natalie is like a whole other mystery to unravel beyond Dodd and beyond Leonard and beyond Teddy. Like you want to see what happens with her. You want to see how they met. And everything just comes back to that one focal point of like, let's start at the end and work back to the beginning. I like, again, it's just another long ramble of mine, but I just think it's executed to almost near perfection in this movie. And it's just fascinating to watch.
Unlike, and this is something that I just put together in this viewing, even after 20 years of knowing that these people were in this movie, I didn't put it together until today. You've got Carrie Ann Moss and Joe Pantoliano playing Natalie and Teddy. They're in The Matrix together, a movie that I think we can both agree
she's
we did not think was as
lady.
structurally, it was not as structurally sound as we would like.
Is he like the Matrix cop, basically? Like
no, he's the traitor. He's the guy who sold out everybody to the.
You're right. He's the cop. In the Matrix, he's the traitor. In Memento, he's Teddy.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was thinking Leonard's actor. That's why I got confused.
And when you said the cop, I was thinking the cop in the Matrix. I'm like, what cop in the Matrix? I don't know.
I was thinking the guy with the sunglasses in the Matrix, not Neo, or not Fishburne, but like the program that comes to attack them. I hated the movie. I can't remember.
Oh, Agent Smith?
Yeah.
No. Yeah, he does look, and also, this is like the greatest hits of late screening because he also played Guido the Killer Pimp in Risky Business.
Oh my! We're all over the place. That's hilarious.
Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, that's just a nice little bit of trivia. But yeah, they're all great performances, and particularly with Natalie. I mean, I knew that this beat was coming because I'd seen the movie a few times, but I remember being in the theater, that scene where Leonard is in Natalie's house.
Yep.
And
love that scene.
The scene starts out with him frantically like, gotta write this down, gotta find a pen, where's the pen? And you're like, what the hell is going on? She's just walking in the door and they're having a conversation. Then we rewind to what happened directly before that, and you're like, oh, this explains how she got beaten up and how much of kind of a monster she is. And then we go back further and we see the prank she pulls at the bar. And we kind of understand her motivation because she is pretty sure that this guy has murdered her boyfriend. Now, her boyfriend was a drug dealer or whatever. So, again, he's an unsavory character. But from her point of view, she's exacting revenge in the same kind of way that, Leonard is seeking to get revenge on someone.
Yeah, and throughout the movie, you kind of, at least me as a first-time viewer, I felt really bad for Leonard, which I think you're kind of supposed to, right? And you just want characters to be helping him. And on some level that like somebody's fucking with him, and you don't know if it's everybody. You don't know if it's just Teddy, just Natalie. And the Natalie scene is when the movie really bursts open for me because you see her face, kind of beaten up in the restaurant early on. And in the back of your head, there, at least in mine, there was kind of that thought of like, maybe he did it, but I won't know until later anyway. And like, but it seems like she was involved with some shady folks. So probably that's how it went down. And it really introduces the noir element of the movie where you've got the black and white scenes, but like it's creating this just roster of unreliable narrators who won't tell you anything accurate. It's just crazy shit is happening. And Natalie in particular stood out to me as just one of those fantastic characters. I also loved Teddy, like holy shit, Teddy, because right from the start, you're told, don't believe his lies. He's the one, kill him. And you see him die at Leonard's hand. And it's like, okay, how did this happen? And Teddy kind of has this like jovial, jolly-ish attitude. And he seems really willing to just let Leonard's condition slide. As you find out more about why he's doing it. And at the very end, the reveal, it's just like, okay, so he's the most crooked of all cops in the entire universe.
And he's also the most relaxed around him because you're wondering, like, did they just meet earlier that day? Because he's so, like, just picked off the street, like, hey, you're the wacky guy who keeps telling me this kind of a story. But you realize however long they've been doing this together, like, it's been over a year since they've known each other ostensibly, assuming, of course, that we can rely on Teddy to be telling the truth.
Right. Well, and even if they have, it's like Teddy, he's just used to it by now. And he seems to kind of get off on using Leonard's condition against him. He like, and maybe it's refreshing for Teddy, refreshing for Teddy, who is probably scared that he might get caught or like hasn't covered all of his tracks, to work with somebody who he knows just won't remember anything ever. And he can just say whatever the hell he wants. And, he uses it to different methods than Natalie does. But at the end of the movie, I'm over here kind of rooting for Teddy because, like, sure, let him kill drug dealers and take their money. Like, everybody's doing bad shit.
Well, it's really funny that you mentioned that because, and this is something that I had kind of put together a couple of months ago because I think like someone else had pointed out, but right before the lockdown happened, Vin Diesel came out with a movie called Bloodshot based on a comic book in which he plays a soldier who I think he has a near-death experience, but he comes back to life thanks to the help of this, billionaire scientist. And he's basically programmed as a mercenary to go around like killing bad people. But every time he comes back from a mission, his mind is wiped and he wakes up and he has to go on this new mission and remember everything all over again. Guess who plays the evil scientist?
Teddy.
No, Guy Pearce. Leonard.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
So is there some sort of Reddit fan theory where those movies are taking place in the same universe? Leonard has cured his condition, but the only way he can do it is by transferring it to somebody else?
There is now. I think Oh man. Well, Bloodshot was a comic book movie, and Christopher Nolan, he got into comic movies later. So yeah, someone's got to write that bit of fanfic.
I bet you it's out there.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, Leonard is a sympathetic character, and I want to sidestep briefly. Did you ever see the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray?
I have not.
Okay, we'll have to put that on the slate for 2 years from now because I think that'll be like the big anniversary for that. But that movie is about Bill Murray as a character who, it's almost like a Scrooge type of a tale. He's this really disgruntled newsman who treats people terribly, and he wakes up every morning, on Groundhog Day, repeating the same day over and over again for I think years, if I'm not mistaken, until he learns how to be a decent person. But there's a character in that movie, and it's a comedy. The character Ned Ryerson, who's like this annoying neighbor guy, played by an actor named Stephen Tobolowsky. He's in Memento as Sammy Jenkins.
Oh,
and
gosh.
It's such a dramatic role for someone who's known as sort of being a comedic actor.
Yeah, I've seen that actor in all sorts of comedy.
Yeah.
In Community and Silicon Valley, like he's all over the place.
Yeah, so to see him in this movie, he turns those big expressive eyes that are so, used to doing comedic kind of reaction shots, but to see those used to paint a complete puppy dog of a character who's helpless to this condition, and to see his wife, like I was getting severely emotionally moved, particularly towards the end of the, their little storyline where she's trying to convince him or jog him out of this, lack of a memory loop with the insulin injections, because the insurance adjuster claims that it is not a physical ailment, it's a mental block somehow, and she's not convinced. But she's like, well, if it is a mental block, maybe if he thinks he's going to accidentally kill me, then, I'll try this little test out. And it doesn't work. But it's so stirring that almost it's a separate movie from this from this weird
really
backwards
is.
told crime thriller.
It's heartbreaking. It's also like, what I really like about the storytelling there is, number one, having a different actor, play Sammy Jenkins as a character, kind of separates you from Leonard, but like, it's somehow related, and that there's something there you need to be looking further into. But what really stuck out to me is that there's a number of things that Sammy Jenkins, his wife, could have done to try to indicate this memory loop, right? Or to expose him as a liar, quote unquote. But she chooses a very suicidal method, which kind of indicates that, like, this is really, really fucking them up. Like, it's not, this isn't just some small thing that she has had to learn to deal with. It's possibly the product of years of culmination of her trying to cope with her husband's condition, and telling the story outside of the actors of Leonard and his wife really allows you to connect with the characters in a way that would be much different if it was like a made up version of Leonard to look older or younger or whatever. Because you need to feel somewhat sympathetic to Leonard, but you need that to be like 2 steps removed, because he's doing these bad things. He's involved in something shady, and it's hard for you to be sympathetic to a character that is doing all these things, even if you see this heartbreaking scene with his wife. So I really liked the choice there to make this separate character and provide this kind of added layer of mystery to the film. I found myself looking forward to the Sammy Jenkins sections more than almost any other, just because I was like, I gotta know what happens. I want to know if any revelation came of this. And there are a number of directions Nolan or the writers could have taken it. But I really like the way it all comes together into, one story that may or may not even be true.
Yeah, talking about that Fight Club thing right now, I was just thinking, wouldn't it be weird if at the very end, once we know and ostensibly Leonard knows that he is Sammy Jenkins, if he had passed by like a mirror in the hotel, and when he looks in the mirror, he sees Stephen Tobolowsky instead of Guy Pearce.
Yep.
Like that is the skinny, kind of bleached blonde hair, kind of rough and tumble film noir guy that he imagines himself as. He's really just this doughy, like 45-year-old bug-eyed dude.
Or he's just chanting, his name is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert, or his name is Sammy Jenkins. His name is Sammy Jenkins.
This movie follows, and it's hard to say how much of this was conscious or just a product of studios greenlighting movies that followed a similar vein, but you can almost trace the lineage of this back to Pulp Fiction. And then a year after that, in 95, was The Usual Suspects, which we're going to watch later this year. And I'm not going to talk anything about that, because that you think Memento is mind-blowing, wait till you see The Usual Suspects. But there are all these kind of like, let's twist the narrative around and have these kind of like surprise gotcha moments. You've got The Sixth Sense with M. Night Shyamalan a couple years before this. So this does very much feel like the era of let's mess with time, let's have a big revelation at the end movies. But at the same time, there were a ton of imitator films that tried to do that, but not as well as the big brand name ones. And I think Memento is not only one that followed in that tradition, but really made its own special mark and announced Nolan as someone that you really could take seriously. I think that's why people were so excited when they're like, wait, the Memento guy is going to do freaking Batman? Wow.
Joker is Batman. No, I think that I think there's still a place for these movies, in modern day cinema. And you obviously know a lot more about the landscape and probably have a full list of movies that are similar or offer the same kind of satiating mind-blowingness to them.
I've
But
already listened to them. It's not that long.
but that's the thing is, like, I think that it's really easy to get caught in this rut of like formulaic movies that are just made to make money. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I will go see every Marvel movie. That's just who I am. And I will love it. Right. But like, there's also the part of me that yearns for these stories that just make you think. And I want that, you know, and that's why I read books, because there's so many that offer that. And I think that movies have become such an industry based on just like how much can we bring in, that folks are afraid to make this kind of movie, you know, with very few exceptions. Like Inception is one of those, I think, is, you know, it may not have resonated with you, but it's something that presents the story in such a way that it's a complete mind-blowing film to some people. And there's just like, in my view, I know so many people who name Inception as one of their favorite movies, or who name Fight Club as one of their favorite movies. And you just don't see things like this coming out as often. Or when you do, they tend to tie the story up in a neat little bow at the end.
Yeah.
And this is coming from the guy who used to say he hated ambiguity, but is now like, give us that, you know, give us this day our ambiguous bread. And and I'm just like, come on, I want to be able to think. And maybe I'm going to sound really old here, Ian, but I think that the age of social media and the age of technology has kind of made us less likely to just have discussions like this about what do you think happened at the end of that movie? Because it's so easy to go down the rabbit hole of, like I said, Reddit or any blog anywhere or YouTube, and find everybody's view on this movie. So like you can process it on your own, but you don't get to just talk it out with somebody. And Erin and I watched this together, and obviously we were like, so here's what we think happened. And she was like, maybe the pieces are there, but we don't really know. And sometimes not really knowing is the okay conclusion to draw, because you know that you can watch it again, and maybe you'll know a little bit more that next time. But this is all to say that I think some of that is still missing from like the movie going scene today. And it's a product of people making movies that are so formulaic or so made to just kill at the box office, that risks are in a weird way too risky. You know, you take any risk and it's too much of a risk. So I wish that people who make movies and creatives who write them would take those chances a little more. And, you know, there's a million factors that go into play here that I probably don't understand, but that's what Memento made me think of. It made me kind of yearn for more stories like it. Play with the formula, tell a story backwards if you have to, build a character who is unreliable, but you still feel for in so many ways. And this could be the result, you know, and 2001 wasn't that long ago, like when this movie came out, or it might've been 2000. I can't remember.
2000. Yeah.
Like, you know, 20 years ago isn't that long ago. It still feels like a very relevant movie outside of like the hotel phone. And it's, I don't know. I don't really know like where else to take this point. I just like, I want more like it. And that's what Memento made me feel. And I feel like that's important in some ways in cinema today, is like, if you come out of a movie like Avengers Endgame thinking, I loved that, I want more because I just love superhero movies, that's different than like, I love this movie that really made me dive deep and sent me down a rabbit hole. I want to go further, you know, and that's what's kind of missing for me from so many movies now.
You know, it's funny. I was listening to, I think it was yesterday, a YouTube video analysis of the movie The Lone Ranger that Disney put out, I think something like 7 years ago now, with Johnny Depp as Tonto. And it might be the biggest major studio flop in history. Like nobody liked it, nobody saw it except for me, and I loved it. And I was, but here's the thing, I loved it for the reasons that this video analysis was taking it to task. It didn't fit in, you know, it's from the Pirates of the Caribbean, you know, filmmakers and all that, and it does pretty much follow that template, except setting it, you know, from the high seas to the Wild West. But they said that they mess with it too much in terms of trying to tell a real story in the context of a blockbuster. It's a very long movie. It's very slow, and there's a lot of different plot elements and mechanics to it, that the point the person was making is that audiences who go to see these summer popcorn movies, they don't have a lot of patience, they don't have much attention span, and they don't want to get invested into a bunch of different stories that aren't going to pay off for 2 hours. I'm like, that's a real shame, because that's what I'm into. But again, I'm not I'm not the one who's going to see this several million times in order to make up the budget.
And this is the funny thing, Ian. I'm really glad you brought this up because people watch TV now that does that exact thing. And they're willing to sit through 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, the last 2 of which completely suck, and they're just waiting for that payoff. So it's like, I don't know where the disconnect is, because Game of Thrones is what, 3 days worth of content? Like,
yeah,
if you sit and watch it front to back, and they're, let's just do it. And each episode is an hour. That's half a fucking movie. Like, I don't want to be frustrated with the masses, because I think there are probably millions of people that feel the exact same way you and I do now. It's just hard to get past that red tape of, will it make enough money, to justify a big budget blockbuster, whereas a TV show stretches over a long period of time and you have time to funnel it through the marketing machine, merchandise it, all that kind of stuff. And a movie has to make that impression right away. And if they're not patient enough to sit through it, then they're not going to buy the merch. They're not going to, absorb any other content surrounding it. So it is a real shame. I completely agree with you. I think that there's a space for these types of movies. They just need to be given the room to breathe and the allowance to be made. And that's where my frustration stems from, I think, is, let storytellers flex their muscles a little bit and play around with what our expectations. And I think that movie makers would be pleasantly surprised with the results, especially now. And I don't mean to like make light of the pandemic, but I think that everybody's frame of mind is kind of changing a little bit. Folks are stuck at home. They're consuming a lot more media. They're watching more things that they may not have seen before. And maybe this will open up their minds to try something a little out of their wheelhouse. We're in the age of content that's created for the smallest of niches, and you only watch what is created for you. But people are starting to stretch those boundaries, and I think creators are responding to that in a really good way. So I'm hoping that we kind of come out of the tail end of this ready to take on more robust and juicy stories than we're used to. And there's still space for all the blockbusters. There's still space for the pandering stuff, but maybe there's room for other stuff too.
I would like to believe that. I do believe your premise that people are, because they're stuck at home and all right, I've already watched all the seasons of the 7 shows that I said if I had the time I'd watch. Now I'm looking for something to broaden my horizons. I get that. But from a pure business model, if there are theaters after this is all over, the AMCs open up again, I feel like the studios that put this stuff out are going to be just giving us safe, reliable product for the next, 2 to 3 years, because they're going to have to recoup as much money as possible.
Yep.
Right. The whole bold, daring, this is a real intellectual mind fuck movie that you're going to love. It's 2.5 hours long. Oh, wait, no, Avengers is playing the next auditorium over. Sorry. The thing I love about Christopher Nolan, even though I'm not a huge fan of all of his movies, I respect him as a filmmaker. I love the fact that when Dunkirk came out, there was all this speculation of is this going to be his big flop, because it's a World War II movie. There's not a whole lot of dialogue. It's a lot of action. It's kind of, the story is all fucked up in terms of the time as we've seen here. But his name alone and that trust that he's built up of I could make a movie about Martha Stewart, getting up in the morning and preheating her oven, and you're going to eat it up, literally. And that
sounds
turned out
delicious.
to be, yeah, well, it turned out to be true, because Dunkirk was a massive hit, critically and with audiences. And I love the fact that you can have someone he loves to challenge audiences intellectually. I mean, turning the Batman franchise into something that's critically respected and Academy Award winning, for a performance. I mean, a lot of that goes to Heath Ledger, of course, but just having the foresight to say, yeah, I'm going to cast this, former teen heartthrob as the most menacing, psychotic incarnation of this iconic comic book character, and you're going to, the people who are laughing at him are going to, initially are going to be wearing his costume and singing his praises for a decade after he's dead, unfortunately. That really says something about prowess and, knowing the kinds of films that he wants to see. I feel like those are the kinds of movies that he makes. And because I'm not convinced the people who make all the Marvel movies, care about the stories or, these sprawling narratives they create. I'm sure some of them do, but I like pop entertainment that's made for smart people or made for people who they're not meant to condescend, is what I'm getting at.
They're just willing to think. And I think that Nolan is really in touch with his audience. And he has a way of like making his movies so that they have enough mass appeal that they're going to be successful. And it's not necessarily a guarantee, but he stretches the limits of what other directors may think an audience will accept. And that's amazing. It's cool to have a director who will do that. I think that Tarantino is one that's kind of similar, though he takes a different route to that destination. He has his wheelhouse for sure, but like he doesn't play around with, frilly, really pandery stuff. He's like, I'm going to make the movie that I want to make. I'm going to tell the story in the way it should be told, and that's going to be it. And audiences eat it up because it's authentic. And I think authenticity is what really comes through, because when you see some blockbusters, it's really hard to feel like there was a lot of genuine connection with the source material or with the production of the piece on certain levels, like the production and director levels, that kind of thing. So it's great to watch a movie from Christopher Nolan, somebody whose films I've seen before, but not necessarily all of them, and see that is a trend and that it's not just a one-off type thing. Where I particularly liked The Dark Knight, where it brings up the question of surveillance, which was rather prescient at the time. Like, that became huge with Edward Snowden and just generally now. It's just cool that he has his finger on the pulse and can tell a story that shows it.
Yeah. And I think, with Memento, I don't exactly know what issues he was really playing at, if there was something he was trying to say, because there is a lot of kind of lofty talk about memory and, what do we believe is true. But I was thinking about how this movie might play today. And in a world where we're constantly bombarded with 24/7 news cycles that have really become, 15-minute news cycles of opposing sides with different ideologies trying to get their points across and make people believe X, Y, or Z, that term alternative facts really is the the underlying theme of this movie, because there's the truth of what happened, there's the truth of what people think happened, and then there's also the truth of the manipulation of people taking advantage of certain circumstances to create the outcomes that they want. That's all over this movie, and that's also all over the cable news channels that we're watching today.
Oh yeah, and I love the line. It was I can't remember exactly what it was, but it stuck with me. The idea of it was like, memory can change the size of the room, the color of the walls. Just insanely good. It's the delivery's there, the writing is there, and it's like that kind of sums up the movie, because it's all that unreliable narrator stuff, but it's also that Leonard as a character is not at fault for his condition at all, because your memory is probably just as faulty as his. His faults are just diagnosable, and he knows what they are, right? So like he understands the limits of his memory, whereas the people who don't have anterograde amnesia, they don't. They feel like they're limitless, right? It's just kind of part of being human, is like, oh yeah, I remember that quite well, when you probably really don't. And Leonard is told straight up, like, yeah, you don't. You can't form memories like that. And there's kind of a power it lends him. It kind of flips the tables a little bit, because he knows the limits of his memory and he uses them, and he takes advantage of what systems he can to fill those gaps, whereas other folks like Natalie may not know what their limits are and thus have no need to fill the gaps. And that's kind of what allows her to be such a shitty person and use him, is she's not testing the limits of her memory or her brain at all. She's just using this guy who knows his and who has to do these things, to have these tattoos, to write things down, to her own nefarious purposes. And that just makes me more sad for Leonard because he has this weirdly fortunate epiphany of knowing what he can and can't remember, and people are just taking advantage of him.
Now, let me ask you something, because I'm glad you brought this up, because it struck me watching the movie today in a way that it hadn't the other times that I watched it. Is it a plot hole that Leonard is able to tell people about his condition? Because if one of the aspects of this is that he can't remember, and he has no short-term memory of anything beyond, like, everything leading up to the accident or the incident, he can recall just fine, the details of his previous life. But then once he loses his memory, he can't last for, more than 5-10 minutes, but he's always telling people about, yeah, I've got this condition. Like, how the hell does he know that if he's essentially waking up to a new reality every 10 minutes? I mean, I didn't see him tattoo his life story onto his back or something to read in the mirror.
Right. I'm a bit confused there too, because is there a difference between knowing something to be true? Because he says, I know all about myself, and remembering something. Now, that's a discussion I have nothing to contribute to because I have no idea. But it could be that he just knows he has a condition, and that's something that is locked in his brain somewhere that isn't tied to his memory center. It could be instinct, as he mentions, because some people can learn by instinct. But if he is Sammy Jankis, who couldn't learn via conditioning, then it is a plot hole because there's no way that he could have understood. I think taking a step back from a movie making perspective, you kind of have to allow him that one concession, right? But it is interesting to pick apart. So I think that yes, he probably wouldn't remember, but maybe it's more he can't remember details, he can't remember faces about things. I remember years ago I watched some random episode of a documentary series about a person experiencing short-term memory loss, and it was like, I remember all this stuff about myself. I know that I have short-term memory loss. That's because that's something that is long-term. I remember that. But when I meet somebody, or if I go to the bathroom at a restaurant, I can't remember who I was with. So maybe there's some sort of loophole there where it's you've had the condition for so long, it's burned into your long-term memory. But specific to Leonard's, I think we kind of just have to accept it as a plot device,
Yeah, because that bugs me now, because I feel like Memento as a film is pretty damn tight, except for this one little thing. And maybe the answer is in there somewhere. I just haven't dug it up yet. I do remember, last point, I watched this on Blu-ray, and I'm very happy that the Blu-ray is not the DVD, because when this movie first hit home video forever ago, the DVD was very cutesy in that you had to unlock puzzles in order to watch the movie.
Oh my!
To find anything like scene selection,
revolutionary during its time.
And I remember, the packaging was great. It was all these little Easter eggs just in the cardboard sleeve and stuff that you pull out. But just putting on the movie, I don't think I watched it until I bought the Blu-ray of it. After that, because I couldn't figure out how to watch the fucking thing. So I appreciate it. A little too clever for its own good.
A momentous revolution in DVD technology.
Sure. I thought you were gonna bring back to Matrix Revolutions, but no, that's never mind. All right. I think I forgot what I was going to say. No, just bring it back to our initial gag. Yeah.
Fuck is Dodd.
Hmm?
Who the fuck is Dodd?
I don't even know if Dodd exists.
It's funny because you brought that question up early on, and I thought yeah, I didn't really think too much about Dodd, but after this discussion, I don't really care who the fuck he is. Dodd to me is the least interesting part of this movie, which is funny because I'm sure to many he's a question left unanswered and something they explore. But he's fodder for an action scene where my favorite line, just to end it on, is when Leonard's like, "What am I doing? Oh, I'm chasing this guy," and then Dodd shoots him, and he's like, "Oh wait, he's chasing me."
Yes.
And it's just a great moment of levity in a really heavy movie.
Yeah, and I think it was the scene right before that where he wakes up in the bathroom holding the champagne bottle. He says, "I don't feel drunk. So yes, Dot is strictly a device, but he is responsible for two of the great lines in this movie, so I can definitely give that a pass. But yeah, well, thank you again for this late screening of Memento. This has been fun, and I was really glad that I got a chance to revisit it because this movie was high in my all-time estimation, 20 years ago. And looking at it again this morning, it's still way up there. It hasn't lost its luster.
Oh yeah, this is one of those that I knew to be kind of setting the standard for like those mind-blowing movies, and nobody had ever told me what it was about. I knew it had to do with memory, but that was kind of it. So I was really excited to dive in, and even more excited when it delivered on its promise of being great. So that's just phenomenal, and I can't wait till our next mind-blowing movie.
What are we talking about next? Do you have the list?
Better Off Dead,
That's
aka
right.
the movie on which your wedding was based.
Yes. Now, this is even worse than forgetting my wedding anniversary. It's forgetting the movie that we based it all on. I was thinking that we're talking about something next month, but we're doing a two for this month. That's right. So we'll be talking Better Off Dead in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and then we have June after that, which I don't know is on the schedule, what's on the schedule there. But I'm really excited because we have our third edition of the Harry Potter Page to Screen series in July, and Prisoner of Azkaban, the third book, is one of my very favorites of all time. And the movie is just phenomenal, and I'm really excited. Still not at the point in Harry Potter where it like unlocks all the mysteries of the series, but a really, really great installment and kind of like what brings it to an echelon above what the first two were in kind of like young adult fiction. Prisoner of Azkaban busts it open and makes you think a little more. So I'm really excited for that. He said 2 months early, but I just had to say it.
Well, since I'm on furlough now, I have not had nearly as much time to read books because I'm not taking the train and the bus.
Yeah.
So I feel like I should start reading Azkaban now, so I'll be ready for July.
Yeah, I mean, what you should. This one is the last of like the reasonably long books. This one's like 300 or so pages, I think. And from there, we get up to like 600 plus consistently through the end. So get ready.
No, I'm strapping in. All right, man. Well, yeah. Thanks again. And yeah, we'll talk in a couple of weeks about one of my all-time favorite movies. Sure to blow your mind, Better Off Dead.
Excellent. I will catch you in un memento.
Stop it.